Take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
Episode of Breaking Points where Dave Smith, the comedian, officially apologizes for supporting Trump and actually calls for his impeachment. So Breaking Points is a show with Saagar, Enjeti, and Krystal. It's sort of like a left-wing versus right-wing show where they kind of meet in the middle. They differ strongly on some issues, and they're both, I guess, kind of the quote-unquote populist wing. So even though Saagar Enjeti is quite right-wing and fairly fascistic on some issues, he still is, I guess, supposedly anti-war. That's where he kind of frustrates me because even in this interview where he's talking to Dave Smith, he seems pretty anti-Israel, right? Like he's anti this whole Iran conflict and us being dragged into it. But this is also the guy who during Black Lives Matter supported rolling the tanks out to use against protesters, and I haven't heard his recent takes about Trump doing that in LA. But, you know, I don't know. It just seems like a contradiction. And this whole thing about being populist, right-wing, supposedly anti-war is kind of the central premise of what I'm getting at here because I don't know, it just doesn't seem to be a tenable position. It seems like people stake that position out because they want to take a strong principled stance and they're sick of Democrats and they view Democrats as warmongers. And so they fall for some guy like Trump who says he's not going to get us in any wars in America first. And then that's the first thing he does because they're not tracking this presidential pitch to the history of the Republican Party. And you know, there have been some arguments made by people like Gavin McInnes that Democrats are responsible for all wars and are warmongers. And look, they're certainly not, their hands are not clean of blood. But if you look at who started the wars that we have been sort of entrenched in for the past couple decades, it was Republicans. And then now Trump is doing the same thing. I mean, Obama was the one who secured the Iran deal and Trump tore it up, and now we are basically, as of right now, this is a proxy war with Iran, and we very well might get actually sucked into a war with Iran, with American military assets involved. So people like Dave Smith, this comedian, you know, he's not very popular for his comedy. He's actually gotten much more popular for these anti-war takes. He's actually a supporter of Palestine, so he does not support the bloodthirsty nature of Israel in any facet. And he's taken a fair amount of criticism for these anti-war takes, but he also was a very strong supporter of Donald Trump leading up to this election. And he always made the promise that if Donald Trump got us into a war in Iran, that he would apologize for supporting him. So he has apparently chosen Breaking Points to finally make that announcement that he is rescinding his support for Trump. And so we'll listen to that real quick, see what he has to say. I don't think this is earth-shattering or anything, but it is interesting to see, and more people of his stripe continuing to renounce their support of Trump would be a good thing, although I'm skeptical about whether this will last.
And so, yeah, Donald Trump looks, and man, I supported him this last year. I apologize for doing so. It was a bad calculation. At the time, it seemed like the right one. But he should be impeached and removed for this one. Wow. And not on some like not on some ridiculous Nancy Pelosi. Of course, the Congress will never do it because they're all a bunch of, you know, corrupt hacks.
This is the one thing they support. This is like the, yeah.
Donald Trump should be impeached and removed for this. All of his supporters should turn on him. It's the absolute betrayal of everything that he ran and campaigned on and everything that he stood for. And I will say, despite the fact that, you know, Donald Trump supporters have been labeled like a cult following, and that certainly is true for a percentage of his supporters, he is going to lose his coalition over this. I know I don't just speak for myself when I say there are a lot of us who simply will not go along with this. So it's just a devastating mistake. By the way, on top of that, he's also going to lose the deportation fight because of this. Because right now he needed all the political capital he could have to turn that, you got a majority support for deportations, but the minority is very mobilized and they're out and they're protesting all around the country. He needed all of his political capital for that move. So here's what we got. The neocons win. More war abroad and, bomb the world and invite the world. No matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain.
Credit to him on following through on this whole apologizing for supporting Trump thing. Although I have to say the whole thing seems so thin. I mean, this guy really, really went out on a limb for Trump and really based most of his commentary for weeks on supporting Trump, and specifically around the idea that Trump was the anti-war candidate. And it's just so ridiculous. I think, guys like this, again, it's good that he can now turn around and renounce Trump, but there's got to be some analysis of the fact that, why did you fall for this con? And I guess, anybody who's truly anti-war and trying to base their electoral decision off of that is definitely faced with a tough choice, because Kamala Harris wasn't a great option either. And look, the reality with the way that U.S. policy was going under Biden and Harris, this whole thing with Iran may have happened anyway in some form. But at the end of the day, Trump owns this because he is the one who was setting up all of these negotiations. And it seems very clear at this point that Trump provided cover for Israel to go after Iran, and that this was somewhat coordinated. And now Trump is right along saying that Iran, they should evacuate Tehran, and that Iran should have signed the deal, and they're trying to get them to come back to the table now. So, I mean, this is Trump's negotiation style. And while it's possible that something would have happened no matter who was the president, we wouldn't have seen this terrible negotiation, if you can even call that, from really anybody else on the docket. But this is just what Trump is. This is what he represents. This is the style of leadership that he has always presented. And, for anybody to not be aware of that at this point is just staggeringly ignorant. So, I mean, it's good. I don't know why suddenly Dave Smith has emerged as a voice on Palestine and anti-war. That's great, except, him and the comedian cohort have done a fair amount of damage to the discourse with their open-hearted support of Trump. And him and Saagar then go on into an interesting theory there about how progressive backlash, or moments when the culture tilted toward progressivism, came in moments of war, usually wars that were started by Republicans. And they point to Vietnam and also the Iraq War, saying that, the hippie movement and the free love movement came in the wake of Vietnam and in opposition to Vietnam. And then they say that, the post-Iraq period is where you got all of the wokeness from, which I think is like a total misread. That's such a flattening of the situation, because, I mean, in many ways, the Iraq War didn't end for multiple decades. And so I guess maybe you could tie the sort of corporate adopting of social progressivism during that time as sort of a distraction from the war. I've talked about how America adopted a covert war strategy after Vietnam, and that was not just Republican administrations that did that, but also Democratic administrations. That's also part of why I say that conflicts like this, whether it's Ukraine, Israel and Gaza in the first place, or now Israel and Iran, I mean, these things are inevitably going to happen no matter who's the president. It's just a matter of how they happen and what part does America have to play in it. And Trump put himself in the position of promising himself to be the America First candidate. And then immediately, I mean, we are 5 months in, and Trump not only has threatened to tank the American and global economy, but now he's just walking us straight into a war. I mean, this is explicitly what he promised not to do. So Dave Smith has renounced his support of him. He also says that he should be impeached, which is cool, but then he kind of waffles on that by saying, and I'm not talking about some Nancy Pelosi ridiculous. And it's like, well, look, who do you think is going to do this? Because you said yourself Congress isn't going to do it because Republicans are completely whipped by Trump, and none of them oppose this stance of his. All of the establishment of both sides came out to essentially support Israel in their strike of Iran. But if you think anybody's impeaching Trump other than Democrats, you're fucking out of your mind. So if you want Trump impeached, then there's one party that's going to get that done. And I say that as somebody who's not necessarily a supporter of Democrats. But specifically, if that's your political goal, you should try to get as many Democrats voted in as possible in the midterms. Something tells me he's not going to do that. His renouncement of his support of Trump and the Republican Party probably doesn't go that far. And if anything, this is only going to last for whatever, another month or two. And then people like Dave Smith and others like Tim Dillon, who are kind of flirting with the idea of denouncing Donald Trump, they're probably just going to go back to their default position because these guys are reactionaries at the end of the day. So they've attached themselves strongly to this position that in America, Americans don't want to be at war and we don't need to be going to these wars. And so that's become a supposedly strongly held principled position that Trump has violated immediately upon walking into office. Now, most people could have told these guys that it was an okey doke and did tell these guys that it was an okey doke, but okay, whatever, they're recognizing that. But at the end of the day, Trump's continued reactionary stance on cultural issues is going to continue to pull these guys back in. And by the time we get to the midterm elections, or whatever other political events come up, they're going to be fully on the reactionary side because that's ultimately what drove them to Republican politics and Trump, is the reactionary nature of their takes on culture. And so the war thing is obviously a strong enough stance that they took that makes a guy like Dave Smith feel like he needs to apologize for supporting Trump. But at the end of the day, even he mentions here deportations is supposedly that he has the majority of support of Americans and that it's a minority of people that are coming out. I mean, these protests against Trump over the weekend, the No Kings protests, were enormous. And these were peaceful protests, marches and more like, just demonstrations in the streets. So that's great. I've talked about how I don't necessarily think that accomplishes much. And I think that has turned out to be the case with these No Kings protests. I'm glad they happened. It's good for people to come out and show certain political alignment. It's good for these demonstrations in the streets to happen. But also at the same time, if we're looking at these ICE protests that have happened in LA and elsewhere in the country, the most effective parts of those protests have been the ones that are directly focused on trying to interfere with the actions of ICE. And so while doing some kind of demonstration in the streets that shows, where you stand is great, it's not really the same as direct action. And by far the most effective part of this unrest that's starting to happen under Trump has been the part that strikes at the heart of ICE's operations. And so a guy like Dave Smith, especially in the face of that policy, the policy of deportation being threatened, is going to default to a more reactionary position, and that's going to lead him back to support of Trump, undoubtedly. But that also leads me to, I think, the most important point of all of this is for some reason Trump strategically has felt that it's the best move to position himself in as many military conflicts as he possibly can. In other words, to use the military as his focal point of leverage and threatening of his opponents in every direction that he can. And that's led to something completely unsustainable because we're threatening war in Iran, we're threatening war with Canada, with Mexico, and Trump is now threatening to do war with the military in democratic cities across America. So these things are not sustainable, especially with a guy like Pete Hegseth running the military. it's like he barely has the experience to handle one of these conflicts. So to be handling all of these things at once and trying to tie in the military's efforts with ICE, it is the least sustainable position that Trump could have put himself in at the start of this administration. And so I don't think it's going anywhere good. He's issuing big threats when it comes to Iran. The chances that this is going to turn into all-out war, I'm not 100% sure, but it's pretty clear at this point that Netanyahu and Israel wanted to go to war with Iran, and Trump is backing them on that. So that's where we're at. Iran probably isn't going to back down. And, you know, people like Dave Smith definitely staked their entire reputation on the idea that Trump wasn't going to do this. I have no idea why. And it's embarrassing for them to have to about face. I respect that somebody who supported Trump can then go to saying that he thinks he should be impeached. But I don't think it's a serious political ask at the same time because, yeah, like I said, I mean, supporting a guy like that, getting into office under the conditions that he did, and then turning around and saying that you think he should be impeached. Look, the time is over for that. This guy already was impeached twice. So now you're saying, oh, we need a third impeachment. That's the real one this time. Why do you think that they did this? The first impeachment was over Ukraine because he was trying to use his leverage to essentially extract concessions from Zelensky. There's really not that much of a difference between that policy and this policy that we're seeing between Israel and Iran. The only difference is that these conflicts have progressed further naturally with or without the interference of the United States. And that is part of what you're getting with a presidential candidate. How are you going to handle existing conflicts? The president doesn't just make everything in the world happen. How are you going to handle things that happen under your watch? If you didn't know that Trump was going to handle everything in the worst and most apoplectic way possible, then you haven't been paying that much attention to Trump. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews. I'm reading Catcher in the Rye right now. I'm probably going to review that on there. Also posting music early. I've got a couple EPs out that were available first for members only. Right now, there's a couple tracks on there. There's a freestyle by me and my buddies Wrecked and Psych, and there is a song, a remix of a Billy Woods track. So if you want access to all that, different podcasts and other stuff, become a member. And if there's other kinds of content that you'd like to see for members only stuff, then let me know and we'll work some things out.